Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh to some of you, and peace out to the rest of you. Hit the share button, you know why. This time, share this specifically with brothers you know that need this, or any brothers you know that are 18 or 19, whether you think they need it or not. If you have the legal authority to expose any brother under 18 to this, then feel free, because you have the legal authority. I'm not a legal expert on when you have it or not, but it's safe to assume that if you have custody of someone or if you are closely related to them, you can do this. Now, you saw the title, Self-Esteem and the Elderly Black Woman. In the black community, we fell victim to white folk bullshit from the 1970s, I'd say, and that California stuff where they started promoting, high self-esteem. Now, self-esteem is necessary. Here's where the problem comes in. Self-esteem, though necessary, was inflated during that time, and studies showed that it did not correlate subsequently to higher academic performance, job performance, managerial skills, organizational skills, anything that matters. Bullies actually were tested and found to have abnormally high self-esteem. So the bully is not doing what he does to the victim because he feels insecure. He's doing what he does to the victim because he actually feels superior, and he feels that the victim is inferior. This is no joke. Narcissists, of course, have generally high self-esteem. Now, it may be fragile because it's not really built on anything, but they have high self-esteem. Whether it's easy or difficult to tear down is up for debate, but they have high self-esteem. Pay attention to this. Black males in the West are not told to have high self-esteem per se. They're told to not be insecure, but they're not necessarily told to, well, I'll put it like this. They're told, but the message is not reinforced. The told message is, yeah, everybody should have high self-esteem. The reinforced message when you're a black male in the West is that you should actually should have some humility about yourself. Now, of course, your humility will then be interpreted as some kind of insecurity. When you are dealing with this idea, what is oftentimes unsaid is that many women, period, do struggle with insecurities, but they also struggle with inflated self-esteem. How are the two possible, you may ask? It's simple, fluctuation. I'm not saying that at any one given instant she's experiencing both in her mind. What I'm saying is that within a given hour she may go through both, depending on where her attention is focused and what's on her mind at that time. That is the case. Sisters in the West certainly have high self-esteem compared to black men in the West. Black men have to perform. Black men have to assess themselves by certain skills. And the one that is always used as a trump card is, yeah, but see, you don't get no bitches, or you don't get enough bitches. The problem with that is that women are trained to be difficult to most men. So, they're going to be difficult. So therefore, most men aren't going to get enough bitches, and I'm quoting the way that we're trained to talk. I'm not calling women bitches as a category. But the thing is that most men are simply not going to get enough bitches to shut anybody up. Make them say, you know what, okay, you have a right to have high self-esteem. Many women themselves don't know what I told you about bullies. But many young girls and even grown women are drawn to men who either can bully or who actually bully others. This is what's funny about it. Because, of course, they don't sit up and tell you this. And if you did confront them with this, they would say, well, no, he's just being manly and masculine, and maybe you need to learn more of that. Well, sisters in our community have been told to have high self-esteem. That's not necessarily wrong or right. It's natural for self-esteem to fluctuate in certain scenarios based on one's own competence and experience. I'm not trying to be unreasonable about this, but they've been taught to have high self-esteem, but they've not been taught to really scrutinize themselves, especially with regards to black men. And so what's happened is that you now have you've got the new elderly black woman. She's black, she's old, and she's a female, but she's not wise. We think she's wise and she thinks she's wise, so she inhales and looks off into the distance and gives you advice. And the funny thing about it is that she doesn't really even understand the subject well enough. Probably for no reason other than that she doesn't even hear you out and learn. She gets half the input, now she's giving you output. Now in our community, we look at the man and we don't assume that the man is wise. Thank you. All right, shukran jazlan. We don't assume that because a black man is old that he's wise. Although, the system is designed for him to not survive. Assalamu alaikum. So we make that mistake. We don't make that mistake with men, but we make it with the women, assuming that she's wise. Even though the man is the one that has to really exercise some wisdom if he's going to survive into old age, and he's black and heterosexual in a white environment. So therein lies our mistake, our poor judgment. I'm going to go ahead and say this. This has to do with the self-esteem. You see, the sisters that are becoming old sisters today that we think are wise because they're old and they're black and they're female and they're in the church probably, assalamu alaikum, sanctified somehow. These are the same ones that came up as kids during the 70s, or maybe they were teenagers during the 70s, and they heard all this high self-esteem stuff. It's good to have independent self-esteem. That's why it's called self-esteem. But they were told to simply have high self-esteem. And yet and still, they were also given messages that would have damaged the self-esteem. And it is true, they were given these messages. Your broad nose is ugly, your big lips are ugly, your 4C hair is ugly, and your melanin is ugly. Yeah, they were told this. This is true. They were allowed to act based on high self-esteem while still having insecurities. We were not. We were supposed to be humble but not insecure, yet they can't tell humility in a man from insecurity. And nowadays, you've got them becoming these old wise women, or old mistakenly called wise women. So I'm going to give you the criteria by which you can understand this. Now, these are two separate incidences or two separate topics for two separate recordings in one regard. But if I recorded about the old black woman that's really a fool and mistaken for wise, then some would say, how did this come about? Well, the self-esteem movement had a lot to do with this. But let me understand this too. Let me make you understand this too. I have to give you a criteria by which you can understand how to differentiate between an old fool and an old wise person. Now, we kind of use this to a certain extent with the men anyway. Kind of. We do differentiate, but there's a criteria we can use for the men that we haven't used, and we can use it for the women, and we better use it. And that is this. If they let you finish the question before they answer, at least they listen and then learn, so they mean well. If their advice is wrong after that point, it was probably an honest mistake. But if they're cutting you off, you didn't fully explain the question or the scenario to them, and they're giving you advice and kind of putting on airs as if to seem wise, you're dealing with an old fool. A nigga don't know nothing. One of the ways you can tell is to see old wise women back in the day would have said certain things people just don't do. We're just not designed to do them, we shouldn't. Nowadays, what do they say? Well, I wouldn't do it, but who am I to judge? Now, in about another 20 years, the ones that are middle-aged, like me, are going to start saying, well, it might work for some people, but not for others. And let's take polyandry, and polygyny as an example. The ones that are going to be wise or mistaken for wise because they're old and 20 years are going to say, well, the polyandry and polyamory, that's some crazy stuff for me, but it probably works for her. It might work. Mm-mm. And another 20 years after that, they're going to be saying polyamory and polyandry, they work, but polygyny needs to go. They're going to go the opposite way of human nature. Because that's what the crowd did when they were younger. And they're going to start making it sound like wisdom because they got gray hairs when they're saying it. We got to be careful about that. We really do. It's one of the reasons why a lot of us are going to have to get passports. Because they're going to do this no matter what we do. It doesn't matter. We got to get passports and go places where they're not this far gone yet, and actually we might be able to save some cultures worth saving. It's possible. Some of them that are worth saving, we may be able to participate in saving and preserving before they get to be too far gone and off on that crazy white folk shit that even white folks are sick of, ironically. I got to go to work right now, so I can't make this long, but you know what? That's a good thing. 12 minutes is long enough. Just keep in mind that your self-esteem should be independent, hence the name self-esteem. But too high or too low can be a problem because one of the reasons we're dealing with high rates of narcissism nowadays is because they were taught to have high self-esteem when they were younger without a basis for it. And we were taught to have high self-esteem, but it wasn't quite reinforced, and that's a double-edged sword in and of itself. But at the very least, a lot of us have come to understand that there is a balance between high self-esteem and humility that can be struck. And the humility and acceptance of one's human limits does not mean insecurity, even if they think it does, and they do. So that being said, thanks for listening. Blackheart, the blackest man on social media. Shine a black out. Assalamu alaikum, black male power. Assalamu alaikum.